went to debunk her because my grandmother came out of the room crying. She made my grandmother upset. And I was like, what did this woman say to you? Very protective of my grandmother. And she said, no, she told me that Tony was with me. And then I felt bad because I'm like, Grandma, Tony was my grandfather, Anthony. I was like, you were introduced as Mrs. Esposito. It's not a big stretch. It's going to be an Anthony or a Tony in your family. No. And to my grandmother's credit, she said, if you don't believe that your grandfather, who loved me more than life itself, is still with me, that's like a you problem, not a me problem. And then she said, how would she know this? And then she proceeded to tell me things that apparently were true that I did not know having to do with my grandfather. So I didn't leave it there. Here's what I did. I went to the list of people that were in the room that this woman read before my grandmother to see who could, her name was Lydia Clara, who could Lydia have extrapolated that information from and then given it to the oldest person in the room? None. There was nobody that woman read before. So then my cousin went. My cousin's 13 years older than I am, but she looked like she was the same age. And she came out and she was like, oh my God. And I'm like, come on, Ro, not you too. And she's like, you have to go. Like, you have to go. She's like, I'll pay for you to go. And I looked at my mother like, could I go? And she said, you can go, but you better treat her with respect. And I said, oh, I'll treat her with respect. I'm just not going to help her like the rest of you. So I went in armed with my like attitude. And she said, can I have your high school ring? And I went, sure. I took off my ring and I handed it to her. And she went like this, did not look at me, and then proceeded to give me information. That kind of honestly sounded batshit crazy. I mean, she literally said to me, you have highly evolved beings of white and gold light that are ready to work with you, and I'm here to put you on your path. And I remember like the way that she said it with such conviction. I'm like, oh, so she's crazy. Like, this is crazy. So I was like, okay. And then like part 2 of the reading made sense, but yet it didn't. But it did make sense. So she was 2 for 2. And then the last part was where she just like rocked my world, like flipped me upside down. I was like, whoa, like there's no way that she would know this. That set me on my path. And then from like 1985 to 1987, my readings were just what's happening now, what's coming up for a person. I had no interest in dead people. In 1987, my uncle died. That shifted my perspective. And I always tell people that when you have a perspective shift, that's where lessons come in. If you're open. I was open. And it was the first time I saw what grief does to a family. And then, unfortunately, 1.5 to 2 years later, my mom was diagnosed with cancer. And then my world was just rocked. And that was a catalyst for me. That was a huge catalyst. And it changed everything because then I was the client.
Is that how you first used the process, was for yourself?
I think before that. So from like 1987 to 1989, when a client came in to see me, I would apologize to them and say, hey, I know you're here because you want to talk about like relationship stuff and job stuff and like life. I go, but I'm also a medium. So I'm going to have to get that out of the way in the beginning. Is that okay? And people would look at me and go like, sure. And then I would do the first part of the reading where whoever was going to come through was going to come through. And then I got into what I thought was the real part, their life, like why they were here and how I can help them. And then I had this one woman where her dad, he was just loud. Like and it was the session was like 50, 60% over and there was no letting up. Papa was not stopping. And then I looked at the woman, I remember saying, I am so sorry. I go, but I can't get into other stuff. I said, your dad's like legitimately like not stopping. And I say this often, it was the way she touched my hand. She leaned over and she touched my hand and said, it's okay. It's my dad. And I like looked at her. I was like, so you're okay spending your entire session with me just talking to your dad who's crossed? And she went, yeah. And that was like my first kind of like, oh, I didn't think people really like had an interest in that.
Yeah.